morning there, everyone, and good morning, Rolf.
Thank you. Good morning.
All right, we are just getting started here today, and as always, there is a lot of people who have signed up, so it's super fun to see. And at least here in Amsterdam, where we are calling from, I believe it's now 10 o'clock sharp, so it's due time that we get this party started, or what do you say?
Yes, it's now sail in Amsterdam, so between all the boats, we can have this nice session today. Yeah.
Exactly, that's it. So, I'm going to share my screen as per usual, and good. So, good morning, everyone. Very nice to see you here who have joined, everybody. Um, Today we're going to discuss a pretty hot topic lately, which is how we can combine CSDM with the tool LeanIX, which getting more and more traction. And for those of you who do not know who we are here at Einar Partners, I'd like to very briefly just set the scene about the company. So we are a boutique partner, which means that our sales pitch is very easy. We work with one thing and one thing only. That is the strategy within IT operations management. And these days also a little bit of AI ops. And we actually come heavily from a ServiceNow background, but more and more lately we are expanding also into LeanIX because these sort of topics, they tend to go hand in hand. So the things that we do every day and that we love working with, that is data models, application portfolios, CMDB, CSDM, and all of those fantastic areas. And I would say right now, we have shipped over 75 large-scale strategies, especially around Europe. And here to the right side of the screen, you can also see a little bit of where our client base currently is located. So if someone here happens to be in a country which is on the gray areas, please reach out to us because we'd love to fill up the map here even more. So with that being said, you guys have all joined here today because you want to learn something, right? And especially what we're going to cover today is to zoom in a little bit on LeanIX and ServiceNow CSDM. Obviously, this is not going to be a session where you will learn absolutely everything about both tools. I think we would need multiple days for that actually, but we do want to highlight some of the key differences. That's one thing. And then we also want to have a look at a little bit where do these platforms overlap and what are the synergies between them and how can we really, let's say, combine these operating models into a world which is smooth, which makes sense, and that both the ServiceNow team can use, the organization can use, and so forth and so on. And actually, both me and Rolf here, we have also worked in direct projects within LeanIX and ServiceNow CSDM specifically. So we also want to share some of the lessons learned. So we actually have quite a packed schedule, and it's going to be a lot of content. Before I introduce myself and hand over to Rolf to introduce yourself, then just some sanity checking here. So first of all, Q&A box. If you have any questions, you should be able to fill out the Q&A box. That's one thing. So feel free to ask any questions. If it's a small one, we can maybe answer it directly on the fly. If it's a bit more advanced one, we'll save it to the end. And if it's a really advanced one, we might get back to you one-on-one after the session today. So that's one thing. Secondly, this is being recorded. So I know there has been a very, very big interest. But as the name says, it's a summer session, so people might still be on holidays and other things. So in case you want to share this fantastic material with colleagues or other professionals, feel free to do so. It will be uploaded on our YouTube channel later. So that is a little bit around the housekeeping. But who am I who are speaking here? Well, for those of you who haven't seen or met me before, my name is Alex. I am the founder here at Einar Partners, and me myself, I'm very passionate about these sort of topics. I'm especially passionate about organizational psychology. And whenever we speak about application portfolios, service portfolios, etc., that's where psychology a lot comes into the picture in my experience. What does ownership mean? How do we do good governance? How can we explain the values to people? So that's what my heart is ticking for. But I'm not alone here today. I have my distinguished colleague Rolf with me. So Rolf, who are you?
Yes, thank you, Alex. So my name is Rolf. I live here also in Amsterdam, and yeah, I've been now in the ITOM CSDM scope now for the last couple of years, also here at Einar. And yeah, indeed, what you said, it's also a big challenge of mine too. And the things that I like is to indeed have these complex models and simplify it for people and think about it, how we can apply these models actually to practice, because then it doesn't stay, let's say, floating in the air, but we can really, let's say, help an organization further with the application of these models. So that's
Yeah,
yeah, a little bit about me.
super. So let's simplify a bit of the complex then together today and have some fun. I want to set the scene here a little bit, or the stage, with why are we even speaking about LeanIX here today? Well, for those of you who have now joined this session, for whatever reason, you're either working with LeanIX or maybe you're advising someone, like an organization who has LeanIX. But the truth is that, especially when it comes to application portfolios, then LeanIX is up there as one of the leaders if we're going to look at Gartner. So, and that is actually reflected more and more in our own client base at Einar and Partners. So right now, 70% of our clients, they are using actually both ServiceNow plus LeanIX. So it's a very hot topic. And if you look globally, I would say that LeanIX is also increasing more and more. I ran some statistics lately. 10% of the Fortune 500 companies are using it, and then roughly half of the German, is known as DAX 40, the blue chip stock exchange companies, they are also using it. So it's called SAP LeanIX these days. It has been acquired by SAP, and although it sounds like it has a very European-centric focus, it's also a very globally used SaaS platform these days. But at the same time, LeanIX, what we see, and I think what you have also seen, Rolf, is that it tends to be used a little bit in isolation or a silo. And this is obviously where ServiceNow can become a key differentiator if you combine these two worlds, because in both worlds, governance and how we operate things, it becomes very imperative. So this is a little bit why we chose to do the summer session, because we see it repeating a lot and we think that it can be demystified. So if our Zoom software is with us here today, we're now going to look a little bit at the platforms, and I think you, Rolf, can take us through a little bit CSDM, LeanIX, and these other topics. So I'm going to stop my screen sharing and hand over back to you.
All right. Yeah, so one of the things we want to start off with today is first to have a look at the platforms, because as Alex explained, there's a lot of synergies going on between them. They have some overlap, but there also are some differences. So that's the first thing we want to focus on, to first explain, okay, what are these platforms, what are these models about? And then we go into, okay, what makes them different, but also where are the overlaps? And then Alex will take over again with, okay, how can we actually bring that overlap and the synergies to practice? So first, let's set the baseline and to explain what actually is ServiceNow CSDM. So ServiceNow CSDM is a service model, a data model that is present within ServiceNow, that's developed by ServiceNow. It's already in version 5 now. And it started as just something that makes sense of your CMDB. So what services am I being used to, or am I using? And it's now evolving into almost an holistic model of how you can map and model applications, services within your organization. So that means we have your applications. How are they running operationally? So what kind of servers am I using? But also, how do I offer these services towards my business? So who is using them? And also with the latest version, the domain of product and ideation and strategy is being added. So from start to end, so from the product ID towards how do I offer that towards my business? It's all captured in CSDM. So basically, CSDM is a blueprint for describing the services that you offer and that you use within your company. A lot of organizations are already using CSDM to some extent. Some of it is only focused on operationally. We see that in our clients. Some of them are way beyond that. They are already mapping their business capabilities and their offerings in a correct way. So we see it being used, all over. That's great. And then let's have a look into what LeanIX actually is, because there we will see, okay, what are the differences and also how are they overlapping. So LeanIX, as Alex said, is an application, and that's really focused on enterprise architecture management. It's a platform to gain visibility in your applications, in your processes around your applications, in your technology, and to align that with business strategy. So it really stays on that high level part, and it focuses on that as well. So on the applications and to get visibility in the applications you are having within your organization. It enables users to have that application focused view to see what it's using, what it's been using as IT components, what processes it has been using on. And it's used for mainly by architects, but also by application owners to see, okay, how is my application being used within the organization? And based on that, make strategic decisions. So if new applications should be built or developed, LeanIX should give you that view if that's needed, or if there are already applications maybe being used for that kind of functionality. So that's the main goal of LeanIX. As we already see, there is some overlap, but let's first focus on how the two platforms or how the two models are actually different. So there's a lot more, of course, but we focus on a few things to emphasize the differences between the two models and platforms. So first of all, the UX is quite different. While ServiceNow has a clear, distinct front end and back end, so portal and a back end where you do your different aspects. LeanIX has that too, but that UX is very different, and also the way users are using it is very different. Second is the integration. So ServiceNow relies a lot on discovered data that's coming from ServiceNow Discovery. There's lots of integrations possible with Flow Designer and other integration capabilities. So ServiceNow gets a lot of its data from those kind of integration possibilities, while LeanIX focuses more on, let's say, outgoing integrations by syncing data to other systems. So their integration usage is a little bit different. The next point is the licensing. While ServiceNow is user-based licensing, so based on the amount of users you pay an amount of money, LeanIX is actually based on application-based. So that makes it sometimes more cost-effective for smaller customers if you have less applications, because then your licensing usage is not that high. And second of all, and that goes second to last, is the CMDB. So ServiceNow is highly relies extensively on the CMDB, while LeanIX is not actually a CMDB. So the CMDB is your configuration management database that contains all your CIs, that has your whole operational world in that database. ServiceNow relies on that, but LeanIX is not actually a CMDB. And that brings me to the last point, and that's the main difference that you can already hear. The main difference is the purpose and scope of the two platforms. CSDM is within ServiceNow. It entails the whole organizations from the operational world to the architecture world. It integrates with all the different processes that are there on ServiceNow. So that's your SecOps, that's ITSM, that's IRM, that's there's a lot more modules that are making use of the data that is in ServiceNow and is in CSDM. while LeanIX only focuses on the enterprise architecture management. So it stays within your applications and what technology it's using, but it does not have a CMDB. So the main difference is the purpose and scope of the two platforms.
Maybe to add there, Rolf, just we both know that ServiceNow it started originally as a service management. That was the original entry point, right? The classic, it's a ticketing tool, right? That you keep on hearing. But I think, that's what you exactly said, that like ServiceNow ultimately is that manager of managers where you can find all of those ITSM processes, etc., which you don't really have native in LeanIX, right?
No, true. Yeah, and we'll actually get into that later as well. So that's a very good point. Let's then go to the next part, because that's where I think gets really interesting. We've seen the differences. We hopefully set a little bit the baseline of the two applications, but now let's take a look into how do they actually overlap with each other, and how can we create these synergies between the two platforms, between the two models, to actually make both use of them and not stay within that silo of those two applications. So we'll start off with the CSDM model. So this is the CSDM layers and domains we at Einar Partners mostly use. We see the main components here from CSDM with their state. And what we want to do is that we want to show you that there is a lot of overlap between some of the aspects within LeanIX and CSDM. For example, the applications and the business capabilities that we see within LeanIX are also present in CSDM as a business application and a business capability. So that means there's overlap between these two platforms, and it also means that it contains the same data. For example, the same goes with IT components that are present in LeanIX. They contain the same data as the product models we usually have in ServiceNow. So here we see there's some overlap between the two. There's more, but this is just to show you an example, and we go into more details later, but just to show you there's overlap between the two. There's same data, and now the challenge is indeed to make use of that data correctly. To give you an overview of let's say also the goal behind these two, behind this overlap, also from the two companies, is that they have some same functionalities and some same goals in what they want to achieve. While ServiceNow is in its base a holistic enterprise-wide capability, with the focus on operations, but also moves towards your business. And LeanIX is more an enterprise architecture management tool, so that does not have that operational view. We do see quite some overlap between the two. Both can and will provide structured frameworks to model your applications, to make sense of your IT landscape. Both can support application rationalization. You can have your application life cycles in both. You can have both of the cost management of your applications to operate that better in your spend and to have better track of your spending. That's all focuses of both the platforms. So that's where I think the synergy comes in place, because we see the goals of these platforms and the goals of specific parts of these platforms and these models. They do have the same goals, and that's I think where the synergy starts between them, and that's need to be very careful, but also we can get the most value out of it. To create those working together, those collaboration between the two, and they don't stay in silos. But that will leave us, of course, with more questions, because we saw this and we also had these same questions, because and that's also what we hear a lot from clients. If we see these differences and we see these overlaps, where should we do what? Where should we model what? Where do we model things in ServiceNow? Where do we put things in LeanIX? Which data is the data source? What should be the master source of what data? Which platform should people work? Should people do their operations in LeanIX or in ServiceNow? Do we do everything in LeanIX and ServiceNow is just a ticketing tool, as you already said, Alex? So yeah, with the things being said, I think these are the main questions to get up to make it practical. And I'll hand it over to you, Alex, to guide us through that.
Yeah, thanks, Rolf. Excellent walkthrough there. We actually received two questions basically asking the same thing, which is LeanIX, does that replace or how does it differentiate from ServiceNow EA module is one question. And another question is it a replacement of ServiceNow APM? And for those who don't know, APM is these days known as the EA module, Enterprise Architecture in ServiceNow. And I don't want to put any judgment here on giving replacements or preferences or anything, but indeed, correctly, I'm not sure what you say, Rolf, but they do the same thing, basically. If you look at the EA module and LeanIX, then one could debate which user interface is most user-friendly, and there might be some details here and there which is different, but in itself, the value proposition is similar, or what would you say?
Yeah, I fully agree. So indeed, those things are almost the same. Indeed, as you said, user experience, user interface is a little bit different, of course, and one stays within ServiceNow, so the EA application stays there.
Yes.
While LeanIX is a separate application, but the goal indeed and the proposition of both is now almost the same.
Yeah. If you, just because I'm not super good in Zoom, so if you stop your screen sharing, then I'm gonna share mine. Just don't want to risk here, so people. Cool. So thank you, Rolf. Then let's look into how we can combine these operating models then a little bit. And the first thing here is, let's take a step back. Let's speak about what is the nature of an application. How does that flow look like when a company decides to buy a new application? Well, often it starts with some sort of demand that, hey, we have a need and we need to go out to the market and buy an application, essentially. And at some point in time, architects, management, enterprise architects and management, they get a bag of money and they are going to go out to the market and they're going to go there and buy an application. And there's all sorts of vendor qualification happening then, and how does this fit? Do you already have an application and all of those things? But it tends to start in that sort of design and planning aspect of things. And then a selection is made. So we have now decided we're going to buy application X. Cool. But often, especially if it's an on-prem application, but of course also for a SaaS-based application, then it tends to be needed to be provisioned. So we actually need to configure that application. If it's an on-prem one, well, you need servers, you need infrastructure, load balancers, all sorts of things, and you may even rely on other sort of technologies within your company, like your database servers and maybe your storage and all sorts of stuff. And that's essentially where we start deploying things. And that's where that sort of bridge from architecture to the operational world ideally should happen. But this is also where we see that there tends to be a disconnect, because often how an application is planned looks different when you look at it in reality. But once that application in some degree has been provisioned and been used, then often it's being consumed. And frequently, an application may be called something differently from the consumers of it. So you have different service departments, you have your business, you maybe have service owners, there's all sorts of things. But these people, they are ultimately consuming that application. So if you have bought, let's say, Salesforce or something, maybe maybe that's a poor example, but maybe not everyone is calling it Salesforce, but some people are calling it the CRM tool, for example. And that's where the service consumption comes into the picture. And finally, we tend to publish these applications in some sort of catalog where you can actually request the application and you can get access to it and so forth. So this is a little bit the life cycle and the value chain of an application. It starts over here and it ends in consumption, essentially. So I wanted to set the scene with that because when we then look at LeanIX, I'm not going to over-engineer this now. I know process diagrams is not always the most fun, but we've chosen here to simplify a little bit. Then how can those synergies play with each other? Well, in front of you here, you see 3 stages. These come actually from LeanIX. We have the plan stage, we have the phase-in, we have the active stage. And then we also have here 3 lanes. One for architecture, so EA, enterprise architects, and maybe domain architects. Then we have the LeanIX tool, and then we have the ServiceNow tool. So as I said, often it starts with that there's some sort of analysis done from the business together with IT architects on which application should we choose. And then we have at some point some sort of budget approval and maybe even procurement. And typically already at that stage, an application gets added to LeanIX under the planned lifecycle. And in some companies that we work with, it's already then get added to ServiceNow business applications as well. Now, once that has been done and we have received that sort of approval, then typically you don't just buy an application in isolation, but you also have architecture standards on it and technology standards. So again, what sort of technology should it use? And this is typically where the application in LeanIX then gets what is known as phased in. And in the ServiceNow lingo, that can mean, for example, that the business application gets updated with the status implementing. But we're still just planning the application. We have not actually deployed it yet. Because before we can deploy it, it needs to be configured. And typically, it's not the enterprise architects themselves that configure the application, but it's like domain architects or solution architects or whatever it is. They set up that application. And typically when they do that in LeanIX, we also see that the data gets enriched. As you configure the application, you may add certain IT components, maybe you relate it to all sorts of business capabilities or providers or interfaces. It can be all sorts of things. But this is where there should be a link to ServiceNow, because an application, again, needs to be used in a context. So the ITSM team, for example, they may assist with the service management perspective on how should we report incidents, changes, do we need application services for it, will it relate to a technical or business service, those sort of questions in the CSDM world. And then you may also have the actual CMDB team, which lets you know more about the actual CMDB, the infrastructure. They may have discovery in place, there may be service instances, and so forth and so on. Once that is done, and you sort of know how this actually will be used, that's when the application go live. And typically then in LeanIX, it is set to active, and typically in ServiceNow, the business application is set to operational. Now, I said before that the CMDB team tends to assist. So typically, not always, but often, the CMDB team, when you work with discovery and software asset management and other things, then product models exist in the ServiceNow CMDB. And that is actually then what tends to be enriching the IT components in LeanIX. And at that point in time, the operational life cycle actually starts of that application. And then you start using it for a number of years before you eventually maybe retire it. So again, this is the simplified process, and I'm not saying that everyone has to follow this, but it can look something like this if we speak about combining the operating models. So what about the integrations then? How can we combine these operating models? Well, first of all, there are out-of-the-box integrations, and if you today are a consultant or architect or a platform owner or something, I'm sure that you already have found this, that there is a store app where you can actually integrate LeanIX with ServiceNow. And there is some basic fields that gets added, especially in the application field mappings. But often what we see is that obviously people, especially in ServiceNow, they may have custom data models, they have more fields, they have more things in the CMDB. So although the LeanIX store application is very good, it's an out-of-the-box one, it could be the case, depending on your ServiceNow instance, that you may want to complement that with an additional custom LeanIX integration for data which is not covered by the store application. So if we look at this from a out-of-the-box, let's say, blueprint perspective, then we have here a couple of different objects. So on the left side, we see the ServiceNow objects. Again, this is out of the box now from the LeanIX connectors and ServiceNow and so forth. But in ServiceNow, then we have the objects like business capability and business application that directly relates in LeanIX to the business capability and the application in LeanIX. But then we have the CMDB data. And here we have a couple of things. One is the hardware models, and that typically comes from like discovery, for example, or integrations, etc. And that actually relates to the IT component in LeanIX with the type hardware. And an example of that could be a particular model of a Cisco switch, or maybe you have a, I don't know, HP server or something like that. But you may also have software models, and that typically comes from software asset management in ServiceNow. Doesn't have to, but typically that's what it does. And that relates then to the IT component of type software in LeanIX. If you don't use SAM in ServiceNow, or you don't have a product catalog where software models are defined, you may need to find other sources for your IT components of type software in LeanIX. Then we also have in ServiceNow something called model category, which in LeanIX is known as the technical stack. And then finally, we have the foundation data, which also tends to be in ServiceNow, things like users, groups, cost centers, etc. And that tends to be mapped to the fact sheet in LeanIX under the application itself. Worth mentioning here is that, again, what Rolf said, ServiceNow, it contains largely the operational world and obviously can enrich LeanIX with that. But LeanIX should not be made into a CMDB tool. We often see what I would say, mistake that there are maybe EA teams who wants to include a lot of servers and components and so forth inside of LeanIX. But you don't want to do that. You want to include what sort of software, the model of them, the hardware model of them. That's what you're interested in. If you want to see the full tree of all the application services and all the servers and databases which ultimately are used, and if you are using ServiceNow, of course, that's a better place to get that sort of data from. But this is the, let's say, out-of-the-box blueprints. Again, we've also seen examples from people who are using this very differently. But that's a little fact sheet for you guys. So, what are some common challenges then when we are combining these operating models? Well, maybe you're sitting here now and thinking, hey, Alex, Rolf, you're speaking a lot about business applications and all sorts of things. What about application services in ServiceNow, or service instances, as they are called in CSDM 5? Well, again, if we're being strict, application services is considered largely part of the operational world, and it tends to be better to keep that in ServiceNow rather than integrate all the application services into LeanIX. I bet you the architects will tell you that, oh, but it would be super nice to know all of the service instances and have that available in LeanIX. But if we're being strict here on the data models and how the tools typically are used, then that's not always such a good idea. But if you do choose to integrate them into LeanIX, then they tend to end up as an application or, in rare cases, an interface. We see a lot of misunderstandings that people think that an application service in ServiceNow equals an IT component in LeanIX, and that is not the case. The other part here is what happens if you don't use SAM or software models. So software models, people may not know this, but they are actually created automatically when you import software asset management entitlements into ServiceNow. So obviously, if you don't have SAM, you will not create automatic software models, which means that you may not automatically get IT components. So if that is the case, you may need to find a better source in ServiceNow to get those software models. Or maybe you want to create them directly in LeanIX and then replicate them to ServiceNow. And finally, I'm sure that some of you, when you looked at that process blueprint that I showed, you may have been wondering a little bit about the life cycles. And I'm going to get back to this later, but the way that LeanIX, the out-of-the-box integration, is working when it comes to life cycle is that it's quite crude in the mapping. So it basically goes to the operational or install status fields in ServiceNow. So typically there is expected that you need to do some hacking there to make it more conform to your life cycles, life cycle stages and states and so forth. I see time is going fast, but that is a little bit around the operating models, how the sort of the process between the tools, the integration possibilities, what objects go where, etc. Before I proceed, do we have any quick questions, Rolf? Or
yeah, there are two more questions. One, I think you already answered about application servers, so where they land in LeanIX.
okay.
So that's you already covered. Second is how would cloud services fit into the mapping between LeanIX and ServiceNow if discovery is activated in both tools? And also about large vendors.
Okay.
So
yeah, let's put a pin on that to the end of the
sure.
cloud services. I think that's an interesting one. So
Yeah.
But thanks everyone for submitting questions already. Clearly there's a lot of interest here. Cool. Governance. As I said, this is one of the topics I'm very passionate about. So I'm going to try to be rather fast here, and then we can leave maybe 5-6 minutes in the end for answering these questions. But first of all, let's open the Pandora's box here a little bit around the life cycles, because this is so important. LeanIX integration, as I said, it still uses the legacy CI lifecycle management. So that is what most people are used to, which is the operational status and install status. But pretty much in all cases, when we work with organizations, and we probably work with like, I don't know, 10 cases like this now, LeanIX and ServiceNow CSDM, then you guys know how it works. These life cycles tend to have been tweaked and customized, and very frequently you will need to edit and tweak the integrations then as well to match the actual life cycles. So maybe you are using newer life cycle stages. That could be an option. Or maybe, as I said, you have customized the CI life cycle stages on the business applications as well. So really think of how to map this towards either the life cycle stage plus the status, which is the new type of CSDM life cycles, or if you're still using the legacy ones. But this needs to work because the life cycles, especially if you're going to use both tools, super, super important. And that brings me a little bit to the next topic here, and what Rolf also mentioned, that the master source and where to update things. Maybe it sounds very simple. Oh, we just need to agree upon it. But the devil is in the details here. And I really mean like the details. We've seen all sorts of cases where you think you have a good use case and it seems very clear cut, but then, 6 months down the line, the data is completely unsynchronized, and what is in LeanIX is no longer correct versus what is in ServiceNow, and you end up in a situation where which source should we trust? So first of all, really decide where the master source should be between these different objects. I showed them before some of these objects, so which has the authority to modify and edit them? And where should updates be allowed? For example, are we only going to allow the applications to be updated in LeanIX? That means absolute read-only in ServiceNow. But frequently you may have additional fields in ServiceNow which you don't have in LeanIX, and maybe you do want to update them in ServiceNow, for example. So these sort of decisions needs to be made, and Rolf will speak about that a little bit later in some practical tips we have. The other question is, should updates be bidirectional? This is an opinion of Einar and partners that we believe that frequently this should be challenged, because it sounds nice in practice that yes, let's sync everything between the systems, but then you essentially end up with two mirrors of each other, and that's not always what you want to do. But essentially create a very clear overview, an architecture map on where the data is updated, where it's maintained in LeanIX versus ServiceNow. Otherwise, there will be a bit of chaos. And as an example here, and this comes from a real case, imagine you want to retire a business application, and you do that in LeanIX, and then it gets retired in ServiceNow. But it turns out that the business application still has active and operational application services. In such a case, the architect or the EA guy or the application owner in LeanIX may have no clue that there has still been application services which are in use. So again, in this particular scenario, maybe you want to retire it in ServiceNow instead, because you also want to retire the application services potentially. And that leads us to the next point. Where are people used to working? If you already are using ServiceNow, ask yourself, where is our application owners working today? What are they used to? Because both LeanIX and ServiceNow, just like Rolf said, they have portals you can use. But just because they both have portals doesn't mean that you should use the portals. So we've seen a few different modes here. Let's say the first mode is that only enterprise architects are allowed to update LeanIX. But application owners, they may be using the ServiceNow service portal or employee center, and like a catalog item to update their application in LeanIX or business application in ServiceNow. Could also be that you say, hey, let's have the EA team and application owners use LeanIX. As said, it's a nice user interface, so that's also an option, but then make sure it gets replicated to ServiceNow and be restricted on which fields are editable. And then finally, we also see organizations who have been using ServiceNow for many years, and they are already used to quite, let's say, power user, advanced users in the back end of ServiceNow. So maybe you want them to continue to update their applications in ServiceNow, but you want it to be integrated and reflected into LeanIX. But the updates should not happen in LeanIX. So think about this, because this is really important. Where do you want people to work? You need to make it easy for the users. And that relates to the last point, and then I'm gonna hand over to you, Rolf. But communication and a bit of storytelling. We see that this frequently is missed, especially when you use both tools. What often tends to happen is that the LeanIX team and the EA team, they are creating their little communication package on how things should be done in LeanIX. And then you have the ServiceNow team, they create their little guides and knowledge articles, how you should do things in ServiceNow. But rarely is there a conformed messaging on this is how you use both tools. So create that communication package, distribute it within the organization, keep the user experience in mind firsthand is our tip, and have a very clear messaging on what goes where, make it easy for people to understand, and also document the roles and in which systems are people expected to work, when are they expected to work, and how are they expected to work. So that was some quick fire tips, let's say, from a governance perspective that we have seen working. So, Rolf, we have some quick tips here as well, some do's and don'ts, a couple, and then after that, maybe we can go to some questions. But
Yes.
I will still do the screen share just
Sure.
because it's a couple of slides. But what would
Yeah.
you say of the first tip here?
Yeah, so indeed, we wanted to also give you some tips to already apply or to think about today if you are within these domains. And the first is to really keep the power of each platform central, and that means target advanced business logic and ServiceNow. ServiceNow is a platform. It has great processing power. You have the flow designer. You can have your processes in there. There's lots of processes already in there. So make use of that power of ServiceNow and don't try to replicate that same thing in LeanIX. LeanIX is not a processing or a process tool in that sense. So that's why it is important to make use of both of the platforms correctly. While LeanIX focuses on the application portfolio management, it delivers visibility. ServiceNow is very good in let's say having your processes in there, and that's one thing to keep in mind to really make the central thing of the platform, to keep that in mind and make use of that. And that brings us already to the next tip, which goes a little bit further into that, is that you want to create a seamless integration between both the operational and architecture world. And what that means is, and Alex spoke about it, is that you want to have both of the platforms standing in its strength. So we don't want a one-on-one attribute copying, that all the attributes that are failed in LeanIX also failed in ServiceNow, which leave you with, I don't know, 10 custom-made fields in ServiceNow that do not bring any value. So those things are very good to keep in mind. Really stay within what's useful within that platform. You need to have you can have smooth navigation between systems. For example, you can link URLs to each other and only so you can see, okay, if I want to know more about the organizational architecture world, I go to LeanIX. If I'm in LeanIX and I want to know what's going on operationally, I go to ServiceNow. So these things are good to consider when using these two platforms. And it all the way in the end, it ends off in what Alex also ended off, strict rules for data ownership. So clear governance on what goes where, why it goes there, and don't over engineer it, but leave the platforms in its strength and make use of both of them in a unified way, instead of having them both in silos and copying and creating mirrors of each other's, which will only create, I think, or we think, more chaos instead of making them work together.
Yeah, and I'd like to add some here as well, Rolf, on the especially on the this point here, the smooth navigation between the systems. I find that very important, and what we've seen and what we help one client with is, for example, buttons. So let's say you are somewhere in ServiceNow, either directly on a business application or somewhere else in the system, and you wanna have that more let's say architecture, the sort of business related perspective, then you could actually have a button which just takes you to LeanIX if that's what you want to see, and vice versa. You can add custom fields in LeanIX with like a URL to the corresponding business application in ServiceNow. And that's where you then can see all the application services, the infrastructure, what changes has been opened, what incidents has been opened at some point, and reporting and so forth, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's one thing. And I also want to mention one more thing, which you said before. I think it was on the previous slide here on, and I really like that, that perspective on use it for what they're good at, because often people think, well, we have all of this data in LeanIX, let's bring it into ServiceNow. But, let's say, you have business capabilities, you have business processes, you do all of these things in LeanIX, and then you want them into ServiceNow. But are you actually going to use them? Do you have IRM? Do you have SecOps? Do you have these modules where you may actually need to use these classes in ServiceNow for whatever purposes? Maybe you don't. So let that dictate it a lot. But yeah, I think that's a very good two quick tips. So yeah, it's been a lot of rapid fire here today with all sorts of general information, what to think of, but obviously we are just scratching the surface. So here is us. We're not always this suited up, but we can definitely continue the conversation. But I do want to see here the questions because I think we had quite a lot of them. And let me see here the question that you asked before. So how would cloud services, SaaS, PaaS, etc., fit into the mapping between LeanIX and ServiceNow? If cloud discovery is activated in both tools and large vendors. Okay, so that's actually what I see, two questions in one. So cloud services, let's say a SaaS platform, ServiceNow is one, Salesforce is another one. More and more we buy these sort of SaaS services. I've seen a couple of different examples there. Some organizations, they don't even add them to LeanIX. I don't think that's correct. I think that they should be added to LeanIX, even if it's a SaaS application. Maybe you don't know the IT components, you don't know the technology stacks, but you probably have interfaces, you probably have providers, it's probably used for some sort of capability. So I think cloud services, they should definitely be added. I can also mention something else there, which is that often what we see is that between cloud services, it may exist integrations, and those integrations may be application services. And sometimes you also rely on technical services. Even if you use a cloud service, you may have some things within your own premises which you want to introduce in the mapping. And that is best done then in ServiceNow and not necessarily always LeanIX. The second part of that question is if cloud discovery is activated in both tools. Well, again, I think cloud discovery tends to be very focused more on virtual machines and what is in Azure, what is in AWS, and so forth. But try to keep all of that data within ServiceNow. Don't make LeanIX into a cloud CMDB, let's say. All right, I see we also have another question, I believe.
And maybe one thing to add on the large vendors, we see that a lot for example in ServiceNow, where you do have one platform owner, but there's another owner for another module. I think both ServiceNow and LeanIX have that possibility to create that parent-child structure, and it's also good to show that there's, for example, one SAP or one ServiceNow contract, there's one platform owner, there are different owners and different usage and different integration per module. And that's a possibility to, within both LeanIX and ServiceNow, to show that parent-child structure of these larger vendors with different modules, indeed. So, and every module can have its own infrastructure, of course, and its own integrations.
Yeah, super good point. Super good point. The final question, and then maybe we can release our I see we're getting a few here, but one more question is, are you sharing the deck? Ooh, maybe. We'll see. But at least you can find it on YouTube and do some screenshots and so forth. We typically don't share the decks directly, but you may see some of the things here from the deck ending up on our LinkedIn page, for example, as a PDF. The second question there is, do you see customers using digital products? And if so, how do you model these in LeanIX? Very interesting question. For those of you who don't know, digital products, is getting more and more popular in the world of ServiceNow, and not only in ServiceNow, but in other contexts. And ServiceNow had actually planned to rename business applications to digital products, but they didn't. Now in the end, it will probably come in the future, and I would suspect that that will simply just end up as an application in LeanIX. Now one could debate the semantics there, is that correct or not, but that's my guess. Then we get another question: how should we plan application decommissioning process and interaction between ServiceNow and LeanIX during this process? Yes, so the process I showed before, that did not show the decommissioning or retiring part, but for sure that is a good opportunity to leverage, again, that operational world in ServiceNow where you have change management, which typically is part of a decommissioning process. I think definitely before you decommission or retire something, there should be a change created of some sort. Yeah, once that is done and everything, all the boxes have been checked, then you can go on to retire them in both ServiceNow and LeanIX. And then we have a final very quick question, which is, do LeanIX have capability to seamlessly integrate with ServiceNow? And I hope that we have answered that question now during this little session. But seamless, that's open for interpretation. But you can integrate the capabilities between LeanIX and ServiceNow. Obviously, there is an out-of-the-box integration. But likely, if you want to have a bit more advanced usage, you might need to develop some custom things. And then I doubt you would call it seamless. Cool. I think we're just right on time, and maybe even 3 minutes shorter, so that's typically very good. But thank you all for showing so much interest. It's really cool. We had almost 200 people who showed their interest and signed up in one capacity or another. So we would love to continue this conversation. Feel free to always book a meeting with us. I also like to mention here that we at Einar & Partners have this year done a lot of benchmarking when it comes to CSDM. So if you are interested in the values and outcomes of CSDM projects, scoping and roadmap trends with CSDM, but also like some success factors with CSDM, you can download our benchmark reports for free. We have actually interviewed and monitored and surveyed 35 organizations globally in their CSDM journey. And there's no sales promotion in here. It's just pure benchmark data. So feel free and download that. But then more importantly, I hope that you all will stay connected to us. So if you're not already, follow us on LinkedIn. This will be uploaded on our YouTube channel. And you will for sure see more of me and you, Rolf, in this sort of context. So thank you all for attending. We really appreciate it. And
thanks.
Thank you, Rolf. This was a good sparring session.
For sure. Thanks. It was nice doing this. Yeah.
All right, everyone. So enjoy your day and see you around in the ecosystem. Thank you all.
Thanks. Bye-bye.